The dust storm rolled through Republic, Washington, with the same relentlessness. It had shone for the past 3 weeks, coating everything in a fine layer of grit that turned the September afternoon of 1882 into something that tasted like copper and regret. Wade Thompson had been tracking a horse thief for 2 days straight when he rounded the corner behind the old mercantile and stopped dead in his tracks, watching a woman in a faded calico dress kneeling in the dirt surrounded by half a dozen mangy dogs, speaking to them in a voice so gentle it made his chest tighten in a way he had not felt since his mother died 10 years ago. She had auburn hair that escaped from beneath a bonnet that had seen better days, and her hands moved with practiced care as she distributed scraps of what looked like yesterday's bread and some salted meat among the strays. The dogs did not fight each other. They waited their turn as if this woman had taught them manners, as if her presence alone commanded a respect that extended even to creatures the rest of the town chased away with brooms and rocks. Wade knew he should keep moving. The horse thief's trail would grow cold if he delayed much longer. But something held him there, watching as she stroked the head of an old hound with a torn ear, whispering something he could not quite hear. When she finally looked up and caught him staring, her eyes were the color of moss after rain, wide and startled but not afraid. "I hope I am not blocking your way," she said, her voice carrying that same gentleness she had used with the dogs. "I will move if you need to pass." Wade removed his hat, feeling suddenly conscious of the 3 days of trail dust on his clothes and the stubble on his jaw. "No, madam. I was just surprised to see someone being so kind to these strays. Most folks in town want them run off." She stood slowly, brushing the dirt from her skirt with hands that bore calluses he recognized from hard work. "They are hungry and afraid. I cannot imagine turning away from that just because it is inconvenient." Her chin lifted slightly, as if she expected him to argue, to tell her she was wasting good food on worthless animals. Instead, Wade found himself stepping closer, watching as one of the smaller dogs, a terrier mix with ribs showing through patchy fur, pressed against her leg. "That is a rare quality, madam. Compassion like that." "Rebecca Zimmerman," she offered, and he noticed the absence of a ring on her finger, noticed too the way the late afternoon sun caught in her hair and turned it to burnished copper. "I run the boarding house on 4th Street. These scraps would have gone to waste otherwise, and I cannot abide waste when there are creatures in need." Wade introduced himself, explaining about the horse thief without really explaining why he had stopped, why he was still standing there when he should be riding hard toward the territorial line. Rebecca listened with an attention that felt like its own kind of gift, her eyes never leaving his face, one hand absently stroking the old hound that had returned to her side. "Will you catch him?" she asked when he finished. "The thief." "I usually do," Wade said, and it was not boasting, just fact. He had been working as a deputy for the territorial marshal for 3 years now, and his record spoke for itself. "But I expect he has a decent head start now." Something flickered across her face, an expression he could not quite read. "I am sorry to have delayed you then." "You did not delay me," Wade said, surprising himself with the truth of it. "I chose to stop." The moment stretched between them, filled with the soft panting of the dogs and the distant sound of a piano from one of the saloons. Rebecca's cheeks colored slightly, and she looked down at the empty basket she had been carrying. "I should return to the boarding house," she said. "I have guests expecting supper." Wade wanted to say something that would keep her there longer, but the words tangled in his throat. Instead, he just nodded, replacing his hat and stepping aside to let her pass. She moved with a grace that seemed at odds with the rough frontier town, her skirt swishing softly as she walked. The dogs watched her go with what Wade could have sworn was longing, and he understood the feeling completely. He forced himself to turn away, to head back to where he had left his horse tied behind the saloon. But as he swung into the saddle and pointed the mare toward the eastern trail, he knew that something had shifted inside him. The image of Rebecca kneeling in the dirt, her hands gentle on animals that the world had discarded, had lodged itself somewhere deep in his chest. Her heart was big enough to care for creatures that no one else wanted. Big enough, perhaps, for a man like him who had spent too many years alone on the trail, sleeping under stars and eating cold beans from a can. The horse thief turned out to be a 16-year-old kid from a homestead 20 miles north, scared and stupid and riding a stolen roan because his father had drunk away the money for their own horses. Wade brought him back to Republic 3 days later, hungry and exhausted but unable to stop thinking about moss-green eyes and auburn hair, about a voice that could gentle even the wildest things. He delivered the kid to the sheriff's office and the horse to its rightful owner, collected his pay, and found himself walking toward 4th Street before he had consciously decided to do so. The boarding house was a 2-story building that had been painted white once, but had faded to a weathered gray. A sign hung by the door: Zimmerman's Rooms, clean beds, fair prices. Through the window, he could see a dining room where several men sat eating supper, and the smell of beef stew and fresh bread made his stomach clench with hunger. Wade almost turned back. He had a room of his own above the general store, a place where he kept his few belongings and slept when he was not on the trail. But the memory of Rebecca's gentle hands and the way she had looked at him, as if he mattered, pulled him forward. He knocked, feeling foolish and hopeful in equal measure. The door opened, and there she was, wearing an apron over her dress, a smudge of flour on her cheek. Her eyes widened when she saw him, and something that might have been pleasure crossed her face before she composed herself into professional courtesy. "Deputy Thompson," she said. "Do you need a room?" "I need a meal," Wade said, which was true even if it was not the whole truth. "I heard you serve supper to guests." "I do," Rebecca said, and now she was definitely smiling, a small curve of her lips that made his pulse quicken. "Though you do not have to be a guest to eat here. I have stew and bread, apple pie for dessert, 50 cents. "Sounds better than anything I have eaten in days," Wade said, and she stepped back to let him in. The boarding house was clean and simply furnished, with starched curtains at the windows and a runner down the hall that showed careful mending. Wade could see Rebecca's touch everywhere, in the vase of wildflowers on the dining table, in the way the lamplight was positioned to fall warmly on the room. She seated him at the end of the table, brought him a bowl of stew that steamed and smelled like heaven, and then seemed to hesitate. "Did you catch your thief?" she asked. "I did," Wade said. "Just a kid who made a bad choice. He will do some time in the territorial jail, but I expect he will come out better than he went in." Rebecca nodded, that same unreadable expression crossing her face. "You are kinder than most lawmen I have known." Wade wanted to ask what lawmen she had known, wanted to know everything about her, but other boarders were calling for second helpings, and she moved away to serve them. He ate slowly, savoring the stew and watching her work. She moved with quiet efficiency, refilling coffee cups and clearing plates, speaking kindly to each man whether he deserved it or not. When she brought him a slice of apple pie, her fingers brushed his for just a moment, and the touch went through him like lightning. "This is the best meal I have had in months," Wade said honestly. "Maybe years." "You are welcome here any time," Rebecca said, and the way she said it, looking directly into his eyes, made him think she meant more than just the food. Over the following weeks, Wade found himself at Rebecca's table more nights than not. He learned that she had come to Republic 2 years ago from Ohio, that she had bought the boarding house with money her grandmother had left her, that she had never married, though she was 24 years old and pretty enough to have had plenty of offers. She learned that Wade was 26, that his parents had died of fever when he was 16, that he had been working as a lawman because he was good at tracking and better with a gun than he wanted to be, but mostly because it kept him moving and movement kept him from thinking too hard about the loneliness. She learned that he stopped behind the mercantile every evening now, bringing scraps from his own meals to feed the stray dogs that had become her regular companions. He learned that she woke before dawn to bake bread, that she sang while she worked, that she had a sister back in Ohio who wrote letters begging her to come home and marry a banker named Herbert who owned a house with indoor plumbing. "Why do you not go?" Wade asked one evening in late October, sitting at the kitchen table after the other boarders had gone to bed. Rebecca was washing dishes, her sleeves rolled up to reveal slender forearms, and he was drying them because staying to help had become his excuse to be near her. "Because I do not love Herbert," Rebecca said simply, "and I will not marry without love, no matter how nice the house or how reliable the income." She handed him a plate, their fingers touching again in that way that made his breath catch. "My sister thinks I am foolish. She says love is a luxury women like us cannot afford." "What do you say?" Wade asked quietly. Rebecca looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw something in her eyes that made his heart hammer against his ribs. "I say that a life without love is not much of a life at all. I would rather be here, running my boarding house and feeding stray dogs, than spend 50 years in a fine house with a man I do not care for." Wade set down the dish towel, his hand suddenly unsteady. "Rebecca." "Yes." She was very close now, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, could smell the lavender soap she used. "I am not a banker with a fine house," Wade said. "I am just a deputy who spends most of his time on the trail, eating cold beans and sleeping on hard ground. But I think about you every minute I am away from here. I think about your kindness and your strength and the way you make everything around you better just by being there. I think about how you feed stray dogs like they matter, like every hungry thing in this world deserves care and attention." Rebecca's breath caught, and her hand came up to rest against his chest, right over his heart. "Wade, the day I saw you in that alley," he continued, because now that he had started he could not stop, "I knew your heart was big enough for those dogs. And I thought maybe if I was very lucky it might be big enough for me too." "Oh," she whispered, and her eyes were bright with tears that did not fall. "Oh, Wade, it is. It has been for weeks now." He kissed her then, gently at first and then with all the longing he had been holding back since that dusty September afternoon. She kissed him back with a passion that matched his own, her arms coming up around his neck, and Wade thought that this right here, was what he had been searching for all those lonely years on the trail. They married 3 weeks later, on a cold November morning with the first snow falling softly outside the church. The ceremony was simple, attended by a handful of Rebecca's regular boarders and the sheriff who had become Wade's closest friend. The old hound with the torn ear sat outside the church door as if standing guard, and when they emerged as husband and wife, Rebecca laughed and scattered the rest of her wedding cake among the dogs that had gathered. "You see what you have married into?" she asked Wade, her face bright with joy. "A woman who cannot pass a hungry animal without stopping." "I see exactly what I have married," Wade said, pulling her close and not caring who saw. "The woman with the biggest heart in the territory, the woman I love more than anything in this world." Their first months as husband and wife were an adjustment. Wade moved into the boarding house, taking on the role of husband and helper with equal dedication. He learned to cook breakfast when Rebecca was feeling poorly in the mornings, learned to change sheets and sweep floors and keep the accounts. He still worked as a deputy, but he took jobs closer to home now, tracking horse thieves and cattle rustlers within a day's ride of Republic, always coming back to Rebecca and the boarding house that had become his home in a way no place ever had before. In the spring, Rebecca told him she was carrying their child, and Wade felt a joy so profound he could hardly speak. He built a crib from cedar wood, sanding it smooth until there was not a single rough edge, and Rebecca sewed tiny clothes while the stray dogs dozed at her feet. Their son was born in August of 1883, during a heat wave that left everyone in Republic moving slowly and drinking extra water. Wade paced outside the bedroom for 6 hours while the midwife worked, and when he finally heard the baby's first cry, he nearly fell to his knees with relief. Rebecca was exhausted and radiant, holding their son with the same gentle care she had shown those stray dogs, and when she looked up at Wade, he saw his entire future in her eyes. "We should name him William," she said, "after your father." Wade touched his son's tiny hand, felt the small fingers close around his thumb, and nodded because he could not trust his voice. Life settled into a rhythm that felt like the answer to a question Wade had not known he was asking. He worked during the day, tracking when necessary, but spending more time helping Rebecca with the boarding house, which was prospering now that word had spread about her cooking and hospitality. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, William sleeping in his mother's arms, and watch the sun set over the mountains. The stray dogs, now well-fed and considerably healthier than they had been a year ago, would sprawl in the yard, and Rebecca would sometimes laugh at the absurdity of it all. "A year ago, I was alone in this house, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake leaving Ohio," she said one evening in September, almost exactly a year since Wade had first seen her. "Now I have a husband I love, a son who is perfect, and half the stray dogs in the territory living in my yard." "Our yard," Wade corrected, kissing her temple. "And I would say you made the right choice, but the contentment was not without its challenges." In October, Wade was called to track a gang of outlaws who had robbed the bank in the next town over, killing a clerk in the process. It was the kind of job he could not turn down, the kind that required him to be away for potentially weeks. He almost refused, could not bear the thought of leaving Rebecca and William, but she had laid her hand on his arm and looked at him with those moss-green eyes. "You have to go," she said quietly. "Those men killed someone. They need to be brought to justice." "I do not want to leave you," Wade said honestly. "What if something happens? What if you need me? Then I will manage," Rebecca said with the strength he had come to depend on. "The same way I managed before you. But Wade, I need you to come back to me. Promise me you will be careful." "I promise," he said, and he meant it with everything in him. The tracking took 3 weeks. The gang was smart and ruthless, leading Wade and the posse through mountain passes and across rivers swollen with autumn rain. They finally cornered them in a box canyon 20 miles from the Canadian border, and the gunfight that followed left 2 outlaws dead and the rest surrendering. Wade took a bullet to his left shoulder. Nothing serious but painful enough that the sheriff insisted he see a doctor before heading home. The doctor in the small mining town bandaged him up and gave him laudanum for the pain, but Wade refused to stay. He rode through the night and into the next day, his shoulder throbbing with every step his horse took, thinking only of Rebecca and William, of home. When he finally reached Republic, it was late evening, and the lights of the boarding house glowed like a beacon through the darkness. Rebecca must have heard his horse because she was at the door before he could dismount, her eyes wide with worry as she took in his bloodied shirt and the way he favored his left side. "Wade," she breathed, and then she was helping him down, her hands gentle but firm as she guided him inside. "It is not as bad as it looks," Wade said, though his vision was starting to blur at the edges. "The doctor said it would heal clean." "You should have stayed there," Rebecca said, her voice breaking slightly. "You should have rested." "I needed to come home to you," Wade said simply. And then his legs gave out and everything went dark. He woke in their bed with dawn light filtering through the curtains and Rebecca asleep in a chair beside him, her hand resting on his uninjured arm as if she had been holding on to him all night. William was asleep in his crib near the window, and the old hound with the torn ear was curled up on the rug at the foot of the bed. Wade tried to sit up and immediately regretted it, pain shooting through his shoulder and making him gasp. Rebecca woke instantly, her hand tightening on his arm. "Do not move," she ordered, and there was a fierceness in her voice he had not heard before. "The doctor came by last night after you fainted. He said you reopened the wound riding so hard, said you could have bled to death if you had gone any further." "But I did not," Wade said, reaching for her hand with his good arm. "I am here and I am fine." "You are not fine," Rebecca said, and now there were tears in her eyes, the ones she had held back the night before. "Wade, I almost lost you. Do you understand that? I almost lost you because you could not wait one more day to come home." "I am sorry," Wade said, pulling her down to sit on the edge of the bed. "But Rebecca, I thought about nothing but you and William for 3 weeks. I tracked those men and fought them and took that bullet, and every second I was thinking about coming home, about this, about you." She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his, and her tears fell onto his cheeks. "I cannot do this if you are going to be reckless," she whispered. "I cannot raise our son alone while wondering if the next time you ride out will be the last time I see you." Wade understood then, in a way he had not fully grasped before, what his work cost her. It was not just the loneliness of his absence, but the constant fear, the weight of loving someone who put himself in danger as part of his job. He thought about his father, who had been a sheriff before the fever took him, and how his mother had looked every time his father had ridden out on a call. He had been too young then to understand that expression, but he understood it now. "What if I stopped?" Wade said quietly. "What if I gave up the deputy position and stayed here, helped you run the boarding house full time?" Rebecca lifted her head, studying his face with those eyes that saw everything. "Would that be enough for you? Would you be happy?" Wade thought about it, really thought about it. He had been a lawman for so long, had defined himself by the badge and the tracking and the bringing of justice. But when he looked at Rebecca, at William sleeping peacefully in his crib, at the life they were building together, he knew his answer. "Yes," he said. "This is enough. You are enough. More than enough." Rebecca kissed him then, softly and sweetly, and Wade tasted salt from her tears and something deeper, something like relief and love and hope all mixed together. He kept his promise. When his shoulder healed, Wade turned in his badge and dedicated himself fully to the boarding house and his family. He discovered he had a talent for managing the business side of things, for keeping the books balanced and the rooms filled. He built an addition onto the house, creating more rooms for guests and a larger kitchen for Rebecca. He continued to feed the stray dogs, which had become something of a town fixture, and even built a small shelter behind the boarding house where they could sleep in the winter. The years passed, marked by growth and change and the kind of quiet happiness that Wade had never imagined possible. They had a daughter in 1885, naming her Rose after Rebecca's grandmother, who had given her the money to start her new life. William grew into a thoughtful boy who loved the dogs almost as much as his mother did, who could track rabbits through the forest with the same skill his father had once used to track outlaws. Rose was bright and fierce, Her father's determination combined with her mother's compassion, and Wade often thought that between the two of them, his children would change the world. The boarding house prospered. Rebecca's reputation for kindness and excellent cooking spread throughout the territory, and they were rarely without a full house. Miners and cowboys, merchants and traveling salesmen, all found their way to Zimmerman's rooms, drawn by the promise of clean beds and good food, but staying because of the warmth that Rebecca created. She treated every guest like family, remembered their names and their stories, sent them off with packed lunches and genuine wishes for safe travels. Wade watched her with wonder, this woman who had changed his entire life by simply being who she was. He watched her teaching Rose to bake bread, her hands guiding their daughter's smaller ones through the kneading. He watched her sitting with William in the evening, helping him practice his letters. He watched her kneeling in the dirt behind the mercantile, still feeding strays even though she now had money enough that no one would have blamed her for stopping. "Why do you still do it?" he asked her one evening, watching as she distributed scraps among a new batch of dogs, some of the old ones having died or wandered off, replaced by others equally in need. "Because they are still hungry," Rebecca said simply, "and I am still able to help." Wade knelt beside her, taking some of the scraps from her basket and holding them out to a nervous puppy with matted fur. "You know what I thought that first day I saw you doing this?" "What?" Rebecca asked, smiling at him. "I thought that your heart was big enough for these dogs, big enough for all the broken and hungry things in the world," Wade said. "And I thought that maybe, just maybe, it might be big enough for me too." A man who had been alone for so long he had forgotten what it felt like to be part of something. Rebecca's eyes softened, and she reached over to take his hand. "Your heart was never too much for me, Wade Thompson. It was exactly the right size." The puppy finally ventured close enough to take the scrap from Wade's hand, and he felt the same sense of peace he had felt that first day, watching Rebecca in the alley. This was who they were, who they would always be. People who stopped for the hungry and the lost, who made room in their lives for things that others overlooked. In 1889, when William was 6 and Rose was 4, a harsh winter struck the Washington Territory. Snow fell in quantities that the old-timers said they had not seen in 30 years, and temperatures dropped so low that water froze solid in the well. The boarding house became a refuge for people stranded by the storms, and Rebecca opened their doors to everyone who needed shelter, even when it meant their own family was crowded into smaller spaces. Wade worked from before dawn until well after dark, keeping the fires burning, shoveling paths through the snow, making sure everyone had enough to eat. The stray dogs huddled in the shelter he had built, and he made sure they had food and water, breaking the ice in their bowls multiple times a day. It was exhausting work, but when he finally collapsed into bed each night, Rebecca beside him and his children safe under the same roof, he felt a satisfaction deeper than anything he had known during his years as a deputy. The winter finally broke in March, and as the snow melted and the first green shoots appeared, Republic began to recover. Several families had lost everything, their homesteads buried under avalanches or collapsed under the weight of ice and snow. Rebecca organized relief efforts, collecting donations and distributing supplies, and Wade helped rebuild barns and homes, using skills he had learned during his years of hard living. Through it all, their children watched and learned. William began bringing scraps to the stray dogs on his own, carefully following his mother's patient example. Rose started helping in the kitchen, her small hands learning to knead bread and stir stew. They were growing up with compassion woven into the fabric of their daily lives, and Wade could not have been prouder. One evening in late April, with spring finally asserting itself and wildflowers blooming across the hills, Wade and Rebecca sat on their porch watching their children play with the dogs in the yard. William was teaching one of the younger dogs to fetch, his patience and gentleness a perfect mirror of his mother's. Rose was braiding flowers into the old hound's fur, the dog that had been there that first day, now gray around the muzzle but still loyal and gentle. "You ever miss it?" Rebecca asked quietly. "The tracking, the adventure, the work you used to do," Wade thought about it, giving her question the consideration it deserved. "Sometimes," he admitted. "There was a satisfaction in bringing criminals to justice, in using my skills for something that mattered. But this matters more. This matters in ways I could not have imagined back then." "I am glad you stayed," Rebecca said, leaning against his shoulder. "I am glad you chose us." "I chose the life I wanted," Wade corrected. "I chose waking up next to you every morning. I chose watching our children grow. I chose being part of something bigger than myself, and I would make that same choice every single day for the rest of my life." Rebecca turned to kiss him, and in that moment, with the sunset painting the sky gold and their children's laughter ringing through the air, Wade knew he had found something that all his years of searching had never uncovered. He had found home. Not a place, but a person, a family, a purpose that went beyond tracking outlaws and sleeping under stars. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. In 1892, they expanded the boarding house again, adding a second story that doubled their capacity. William turned 10 and began helping his father with the heavier work, showing the same steadiness and reliability that Wade had always prized. Rose, at 8, was already helping her mother manage the kitchen, her bright mind keeping track of supplies and schedules with impressive accuracy. Wade's hair was starting to show gray at the temples, and Rebecca laughed that he was becoming distinguished. She was as beautiful to him as she had been that dusty September day, perhaps more so, because now he knew every facet of who she was. He knew how she sang while she worked, slightly off-key but with such joy that it did not matter. He knew how she curled against him at night, her head on his chest, her breath evening out into sleep. He knew the fierce protectiveness in her eyes when someone spoke unkindly, the way she would defend the vulnerable with a courage that belied her gentle nature. One afternoon in June, Wade was repairing the roof of the dog shelter when a stranger rode into town. He was young, maybe 22, with the hard eyes of someone who had seen too much violence too soon. Wade recognized the type immediately, years of experience reading people making him wary. He watched from the roof as the young man dismounted outside the saloon, watched the way his hand stayed close to the gun on his hip. That evening, the stranger showed up at the boarding house asking for a room. Rebecca, who judged no one by their appearance, welcomed him with her usual warmth and showed him to a clean room on the second floor. Wade said nothing, but he kept his own gun close that night, an old habit reasserting itself. Over the following days, Wade observed the stranger, whose name was Jack Connors. He ate meals in silence, spoke to no one, and spent his evenings drinking at the saloon. But Wade also noticed other things. He noticed how Jack's eyes followed Rebecca when she moved through the dining room, not with the leering interest of some men but with something like longing, as if her kindness was a language he had forgotten how to speak. He noticed how Jack stopped one morning to help William carry water from the well, not asking for thanks, just doing it. He noticed how Jack sat on the back steps one evening, watching Rebecca feed the stray dogs, his expression unreadable. On the fourth day, Jack approached Wade while he was splitting wood behind the house. "You are the deputy who retired," Jack said without preamble. "I heard stories about you when I was younger. They said you were the best tracker in the territory." "I was a deputy," Wade corrected, not stopping his work. "Now I help run this boarding house with my wife." "Why?" Jack asked, and there was genuine confusion in his voice. "You had a reputation. You could have had work anywhere." Wade set down the axe and looked at the young man directly. "Because I found something that mattered more than reputation. I found a reason to stop moving, to build something instead of just chasing things down." Jack was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know how to do that," he finally said, his voice so low Wade almost missed it. "I have been running for so long I do not know how to stop." Wade studied him, seeing past the hard exterior to the lost young man underneath. "What are you running from?" "Myself, mostly," Jack said with a bitter laugh. "Mistakes, bad choices, things I cannot take back." "Have you killed anyone who did not deserve it?" Wade asked bluntly. "No," Jack said immediately. "I have killed, but only in self-defense, only when I had no choice." "Then you can stop running," Wade said. "You can choose to be someone different, to build something instead of destroying. But you have to want it. You have to be willing to do the work." Jack looked at him for a long moment, and Wade saw something shift in the young man's eyes. "How do I start?" "You start by staying," Wade said. "You stay in one place long enough to put down roots. You find people who matter and you protect them, care for them. You do small kindnesses even when no one is watching. You feed stray dogs because they are hungry, not because it benefits you." Over the following weeks, Jack Connors did stay. He took a job at the lumber mill and rented a room at the boarding house long-term. Wade watched him slowly transform, saw the hardness in his eyes begin to soften as Rebecca's kindness, and the rhythms of ordinary life worked their magic. Jack started joining William in the morning to feed the dogs, started helping Rose with her chores without being asked. He was quiet and awkward about it, as if kindness was a skill he had to relearn, but he persisted. One evening, Wade found Jack sitting on the back steps with the old hound's head in his lap, tears streaming silently down his face. "I forgot," Jack said when he realized Wade was there. "I forgot that this existed, people being good just because they can be. Your wife feeding these dogs every day, not for recognition or reward, just because they are hungry. You building them a shelter, teaching your kids to be kind. I forgot the world had this in it." Wade sat down beside him, not speaking, just being present. "Sometimes that was all another person needed." "I want to be better," Jack said finally. "I want to be the kind of man who deserves to be around people like your family. I do not know if I can, but I want to try." "Then you will," Wade said with certainty, "because wanting it is the first step. The rest is just showing up every day and doing the work." Jack did show up every day, and slowly he became part of the fabric of their lives. He was like another son to Rebecca, who mothered him the way she mothered everyone who came through her doors. He became a friend to Wade, someone who understood the weight of a violent past and the struggle to build something peaceful. He was a protector to William and Rose, teaching them skills while learning from their unself-conscious goodness. Years passed, and Jack Connors became Jack the Carpenter, known throughout Republic for his honest work and quiet generosity. He married a school teacher named Sarah in 1895 and built her a house with his own hands, using everything he had learned about making something solid and lasting. At their wedding, Rebecca cried happy tears, and Wade stood as Jack's best man, proud of the transformation he had witnessed. By 1897, the boarding house was an established institution in Republic, and Wade and Rebecca were considered pillars of the community. William, now 14, was talking about becoming a veterinarian. his love for animals having grown from watching his mother's example into a genuine calling. Rose, at 12, was already helping manage the boarding house accounts, her head for numbers and organization surpassing even her father's. The old hound finally died in the spring of that year, peaceful in his sleep, and they buried him in the yard with a marker that Rebecca carved herself. Wade held her while she cried, understanding that she mourned not just one dog but all the years of caring, all the strays that had passed through their lives. But new dogs came, as they always did, and Rebecca continued to feed them, her compassion as boundless as it had been that first day. In June, Wade woke to find Rebecca sitting by the window in their bedroom, looking out at the dawn breaking over the mountains. She was 40 years old now, with silver threads in her auburn hair and laugh lines at the corners of her eyes, and she was still the most beautiful thing Wade had ever seen. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, moving to stand behind her, his hands on her shoulders. "About how different my life is from what I imagined," Rebecca said. "When I was young, I thought I would marry a nice man in Ohio, have children, live a predictable life. But then I came here, and I found something so much better. Better than a banker with indoor plumbing," Wade teased gently. "So much better," Rebecca said, turning to look up at him. "I found purpose. I found a way to matter, to make a difference even in small ways. I found children who are growing into remarkable people, and I found you." Wade knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "That day I saw you in the alley, feeding those strays, I thought I was just passing through. I thought I was stopping for a moment before moving on to the next job, the next town. But you changed everything. You showed me that the biggest adventures are not found out there on the trail. They are found in staying and building, in loving someone so completely that their joy becomes your joy and their pain becomes your pain." "Wade Thompson," Rebecca said, her eyes bright with emotion, "you have made every day of the past 15 years an adventure. You have been my partner in everything, from running this boarding house to raising our children to feeding every stray creature that crosses our path. I could not have asked for a better life than the one we built together." They sat there as the sun rose, holding hands and watching the world wake up, and Wade felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was what he had been searching for all those years ago, even when he had not known what he was looking for. This moment, this woman, this life. The years that followed were not without their sorrows. Wade's old injury from that long-ago gunfight began to trouble him in cold weather, making his shoulder ache and his arm less steady than it once was. Rebecca's sister in Ohio died, and Rebecca grieved the relationship that had been strained by distance and different choices. The country was changing around them, the wildness of the frontier gradually giving way to civilization, and sometimes Wade felt like he and Rebecca were relics from another era. But through it all, they had each other. They had their children, who were growing into adults they could be proud of. They had their boarding house, which continued to welcome travelers and provide refuge. They had their dogs, a constantly rotating population of strays who found temporary or permanent homes in their yard. They had the respect and affection of their community, earned through years of consistent kindness and generosity. In 1900, as a new century dawned, William left for veterinary college in Seattle, his dream finally within reach. Rose took over managing the boarding house, showing a talent for business that surprised even her proud parents. Wade and Rebecca, now in their early 40s, found themselves with slightly more time and slightly less responsibility, and they discovered the joy of simply being together without the constant demands of work. They took walks in the evening, hand in hand, through the town that had become their home. They sat on their porch and remembered stories from the past 15 years, laughing at the mishaps and marveling at how far they had come. They made love with the easy intimacy of people who knew each other's bodies as well as their own, and Wade thought that this was what the poets wrote about when they wrote about love. One evening in September of 1901, exactly 19 years after he had first seen her, Wade took Rebecca back to the alley behind the Mercantile. It was different now, paved where it had once been dirt, but the essence was the same. He had brought scraps from dinner, and as they had done thousands of times before, they fed the stray dogs that gathered, their hands working in perfect synchronization. "You remember the first time I saw you here?" Wade asked as a young terrier took a piece of bread from his hand. "I remember," Rebecca said, smiling. "I thought you were going to tell me to stop wasting food the way so many others had, but instead you looked at me like I was doing something remarkable." "You were," Wade said. "You are. 19 years later and you are still here, still feeding hungry dogs, still caring about creatures that most people ignore. Your heart is still as big as it was that first day." "Our hearts," Rebecca corrected. "You started feeding them too, remember? You joined me in this strange compassion." Wade pulled her close, right there in the alley with the dogs milling around their feet and the September sun setting behind them. "I love you, Rebecca Thompson. I loved you that first day when I saw you kneeling in the dirt. I loved you when we married, when our children were born, through every joy and every sorrow. And I will love you until the day I die and beyond if the universe allows it." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "And I love you, Wade Thompson. You saw my heart and did not turn away from it. You embraced it, joined it, helped it grow even bigger. You showed me that compassion does not make us weak, it makes us strong. And you gave me a life beyond anything I dreamed possible." They stood there holding each other as the last light faded from the sky. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful. The stray dogs settled around them, content and fed, and somewhere in the distance, Republic went about its evening business, unaware that in this small alley, a love story that had begun 19 years ago was still being written, still unfolding in all its simple, profound glory. The years rolled on, bringing William home from college as a qualified veterinarian who set up practice in Republic, bringing Rose a husband named Thomas who was a carpenter, and shared Jack Connor's belief in honest work and kindness. Grandchildren arrived, first a boy named Wade after his grandfather, then twin girls who had Rebecca's green eyes and auburn hair. Wade and Rebecca grew older together, their bodies wearing down but their love growing stronger with each passing year. They handed over management of the boarding house to Rose and Thomas, though Rebecca still cooked special meals and Wade still maintained the dog shelter. They became the town's living memory, the couple who had been there through all the changes, who represented something essential about what Republic had been and could still be. On a warm evening in June of 1912, 30 years after that first meeting, Wade and Rebecca sat on their porch surrounded by their family. William was there with his wife and children, Rose with her husband and their brood. Jack Connors and Sarah had come for dinner with their own children, a testament to the power of second chances and chosen family. The yard was full of dogs, descendants perhaps of those first strays, and the sound of children's laughter mixed with the soft evening breeze. Wade looked at Rebecca, now 54 with her hair gone completely silver, and saw the same woman who had knelt in the dirt feeding scraps to hungry dogs. Her heart had not shrunk with age, had not hardened with disappointment or loss. If anything, it had grown larger, encompassing more people and more creatures, radiating a warmth that drew others to her like moths to a flame. "What are you thinking?" Rebecca asked, catching him staring. "That I am the luckiest man who ever lived," Wade said honestly. "That every choice I made, every turn in the road, led me to that alley on that September day, led me to you." Rebecca reached over and took his hand, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. "We built something good, did we not? Something that will last beyond us." Wade looked at their children and grandchildren, at the boarding house that still welcomed strangers, at the dogs sleeping contentedly in their shelter, and nodded. "We built something extraordinary. We built a life based on compassion and love, and we taught others to do the same. That is a legacy worth having." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Wade pulled Rebecca close and kissed her temple, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. They had been given 30 years together, 30 years of love and laughter and hard work and purpose. 30 years that had started with a simple act of kindness toward creatures that no one else wanted, that had grown into something neither of them could have imagined.